The wind always carried whispers across the plains, soft and haunting like the memories of a life that once knew peace. On the far edge of Arizona, where the dust met the horizon and the cattle roamed like forgotten promises, lived a man named Thomas Reed, a rancher whose heart had grown quiet since the passing of his wife 3 winters before. He rose before dawn, fed the animals, mended fences, and went to bed long after the stars had taken their places, yet the silence of his home pressed on him like a heavy saddle. His 2 young children, Clara and Luke, tried to fill the empty spaces with laughter and mischief, but even their joy carried the dull ache of loss. The house no longer smelled of fresh bread, nor rang with the sound of their mother humming while she worked. Everything seemed to echo, her absence, his loneliness, and the growing distance between what he was and what he used to be. The ranch, once full of life, had turned into a burden he bore out of duty rather than love. When spring came that year, it brought not hope but dust storms, a broken fence line, and sickness that spread through the cattle. The chores doubled, the debts deepened, and Thomas began to feel that maybe God had forgotten him entirely. It was on one of those long afternoons, when the barn roof leaked and the smell of decay mixed with hay, that he finally decided he needed help, not just any help, but someone who could bring a sense of order back into the chaos his life had become. Word spread quickly in small towns, and by the following week, a woman arrived at the ranch gate, a tall, quiet figure with skin the color of sun-warmed earth and eyes that seemed to have seen far too much of both sorrow and strength. Her name was Ayanna, and she introduced herself as a widow from the nearby Apache settlement. Her husband, she said softly, had died during a logging accident the previous year, leaving her with 2 children and little means to survive. Her voice carried neither pity nor pride, only the steady calm of someone who had long since learned that life rarely offers kindness without cost. Thomas hesitated at first. He had heard things, rumors and prejudice that floated among ranchers like smoke from a fire they never put out. But something in the woman's gaze, steady and unwavering, made him pause. She asked for no charity, only work, and promised to clean the barn and help where she could. The pay she asked for was modest, far less than what he'd offered farmhands before. Thomas agreed reluctantly, still unsure whether he was hiring trouble or salvation. From the first morning, Ayanna moved through the ranch with quiet efficiency. She said little, but her hands spoke in their own way, mending, cleaning, repairing what time and grief had undone. She worked barefoot at times, feeling the earth beneath her feet, and hummed melodies in a language Thomas did not understand. The barn, once a place of neglect and sour air, slowly began to change. The scent of cedar and soap replaced the stench of mold, tools found their proper places, the horses, even the most temperamental ones, seemed calmer when she was near. Luke and Clara, at first shy and cautious, soon followed her like shadows. They watched her braid her hair, listened to her hum, and asked questions she answered with patience. By the end of the week, Clara had started wearing her hair in 2 long braids just like Ayanna's, and Luke had begun calling her Miss Aya, a name that made her smile for the first time since she arrived. Thomas noticed, though he tried not to show it, how easily the children took to her, as if their hearts had been waiting for someone to fill a space they could not name. Days turned to weeks, and routine settled like dust after a storm. The ranch began to feel alive again, quietly, gently, as though it was healing. But Thomas wrestled with feelings he couldn't quite place. He admired Ayanna's strength, her way of moving through hardship without complaint, yet there was a wall between them, an invisible boundary shaped by history, by grief, by fear of feeling again. At night, he'd sit by the window, watch the barn lantern glow in the distance, and wonder what kind of life she'd lived before fate had brought her here. He found himself lingering in conversation with her more often, about the land, about the stars, about the weight of trying to raise children alone. Sometimes, he admitted one evening, I think the silence will swallow me whole. Ayanna looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. Silence doesn't always mean emptiness, she said. Sometimes it's where the heart waits to listen. Those words lingered in him long after she left to tend to her children. Then came the day everything changed. The morning sun rose angry and red, and by noon the heat had grown unbearable. Thomas had been out riding, checking on the cattle near the canyon, when one of the younger cows broke loose and fell into a ravine. It took him hours to get it out, and by the time he returned home, his body ached and his mind was consumed by exhaustion and worry. As he dismounted and approached the barn, he noticed the door was half open. A soft hum drifted out, barely audible above the sound of the wind. Curious, he stepped inside, and froze. There, on a bed of hay, lay Ayanna, her back against a wooden beam, her hair loose and dark against the golden light filtering in. In her arms, little Luke and Clara were fast asleep, their small bodies curled into her like she was a part of the earth itself. Ayanna was humming softly, her voice tender, ancient, like something sacred that belonged to neither one world nor another. For a moment, Thomas couldn't move. His first instinct was confusion, then disbelief, and finally something deeper, something that pulled at the ache he'd buried for so long. He stepped closer, careful not to wake them, and felt a lump rise in his throat. His children, who hadn't slept peacefully in months, now rested as if the whole world had gone quiet just for them. Clara's hand was wrapped in Ayanna's braid, Luke's cheek pressed against her side. A warmth filled the barn that had nothing to do with sunlight, it was human, healing, wordless. Ayanna looked up and met his gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "They were tired. I just sang to them, like I used to sing to my own." Her eyes glistened, and he saw in them the weight of love and loss intertwined. Thomas swallowed hard. "You miss them," he said quietly. "Every day," she replied. "But today. I felt them close." That evening, something inside Thomas shifted. It wasn't sudden, nor did it come with any great revelation. It was quieter than that, like the first drop of rain after years of drought. He realized that compassion could bloom even in the harshest soil, that healing sometimes came not from forgetting, but from sharing the pain. Over the next days, he found himself watching Ayanna differently, not as a hired hand or an outsider, but as someone who had unknowingly brought light back into a place long darkened by grief. He began to invite her to dinner with the children, and soon laughter returned to the table. Clara asked Ayanna to braid her hair every morning before chores. Luke started helping her with feeding the chickens. The ranch began to hum again with small sounds of life, the kind that whisper of hope, of beginnings, of second chances. But the world outside their small circle wasn't kind. Word spread through the nearby town that Thomas Reed had taken in an Apache woman, and not everyone saw it as an act of kindness. Some called it foolishness, others worse. One afternoon, as Thomas came into town for supplies, he overheard two men at the store whispering loud enough for him to hear, "You see Reed lately? Man's got himself an Indian woman cleaning his barn. Probably more than cleaning, if you know what I mean." The laughter that followed cut through him like a knife. He said nothing, but the shame and anger boiled inside. That night, he found himself distant again, quiet at dinner, avoiding Ayanna's gaze. She noticed but said nothing. It wasn't until Clara asked, "Papa, are people mean to Miss Aya because she's different," that the dam broke inside him. He looked at his children, at Ayanna's calm face, and realized the truth, that the world would always have those who feared what they didn't understand, but that fear had no place in a home built on kindness. The next morning, he rode into town with his children and Ayanna beside him. When he walked into the general store, he made sure everyone saw them together. He spoke clearly, his voice firm but calm. "This woman saved my home," he said. "She's not my servant, she's family. If anyone's got a problem with that, they can take it up with me." No one spoke, though a few men lowered their eyes. From that day on, no one whispered again. Respect, like trust, is earned not by force, but by courage. Seasons turned, and with them, the scars of loss slowly healed. The ranch thrived again, not because of money or rain, but because of the quiet grace that had settled over it. Thomas and Ayanna never spoke much about the moment in the barn, but both carried it like a sacred secret, the day compassion bridged two worlds and taught them that love isn't born from blood or race or circumstance, but from the willingness to see humanity in another's eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the land in hues of gold, Thomas stood watching the children chase each other through the field. Ayanna walked beside him, her hair caught in the breeze, her expression peaceful. "They're happy," she said softly. "They are," he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "So am I." She looked at him, her smile faint but real. It's good to see a man remember how to smile. In time, the people around them learned too, some slowly, some reluctantly, that kindness isn't weakness and love knows no boundary. When Luke and Clara grew older, they often told the story of the day their father found them asleep in the arms of the woman who healed them all. And every time they spoke of it, they remembered the warmth, the song, the stillness in that barn, the moment the silence finally broke, and a broken family began to breathe again. And though life would bring its share of hardships, the lesson remained: compassion doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a stranger with tired eyes and steady hands, who simply chooses to care when the world looks away. For Thomas, Ayanna, and the children, that simple choice changed everything. The ranch that once echoed with loss now sang with laughter, the walls holding not just memories of what was gone, but the promise of what had been found, the power of humanity to heal, forgive, and begin again. And under the same vast sky that once bore their sorrow, they built something lasting, something sacred, not a life without pain, but a life where love had the final word.